A very good afternoon to everyone present here. Before we begin, I would kindly request everyone to put their mobile on the silent, please. Esteemed panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to Sapru House to discuss the book titled The Pashtun, A Contested History, authored by Tilak Devasher. We have a very distinguished panel to discuss this book. We are grateful to our esteemed panelists for their kind acceptance of our invitation. The program of the event will be as follows. The introductory remarks will be made by Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General ICWA, who will also be chairing the session. Thereafter, the author, Sri Devasher, Honorable Member of the National Security Advisory Board, will give a presentation on his book. This will be followed by a panel discussion. Our esteemed panelists for the discussion are Ambassador Vivek, Katju, former Indian Ambassador to Afghanistan, and Dr. Shalini Chawla, Distinguished Fellow, Center for Air Power Studies, New Delhi. Following that, there would be a moderated discussion among the panelists, which would be followed by a question-answer session. With this, may I now invite DG ICWA Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh to make her introductory remarks and conduct the proceedings. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to Sapru House today for a discussion on Mr. Tilak Devasher's book, The Pashtuns, A Contested History. Of course, this is not his first book, this is his fourth book, and apart from being a member of the National Advisory Board, Tilak is an author of repute, and his scholarship you can judge by the fact of the books that he has written, and his knowledge about the region is very evident in those books. Those books are, of course, Pakistan Quoting the Abscess, Pakistan at the Helm, Pakistan, the Balochistan Conundrum. So this book is about a very significant group of people and a title which very aptly describes their journey. We are joined today by Ambassador Vivek Katju. He is, of course, has a long association with Pakistan, Afghanistan. He was, of course, my boss, both in Delhi and in Kabul. And he has seen the development in Afghanistan, in which clearly the Pashtuns play a very important part, right from the time of, I think, when the Mujahideen were in power, through 9/11, through the Taliban, through 9/11, and then on to seeing the government of Hamid Karzai. So he knows the region very, very well, and we are privileged to have him here today as a discussant. We also have Shalini Chawla. She is a scholar, and she also specializes in the region of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and we look forward to her remarks as well on the book and on the Pashtuns. As far as the Pashtun identity is concerned, of course, it brings to mind immediately a people who are fiercely independent, who have a high sense of honor and are bound by the Pashtun Wali, which is their code of conduct. And they live in a very rough and tough terrain. They are, therefore, fierce fighters and with a proud history. The land which they inhabit is the Suleiman Range, which lies between the Hindu Kush and the Indus River. And this land has been a natural barrier between Central Asia as well as South Asia. And it also lies along the route which was used by Alexander on to Nadir Shah to enter India. So that is the land that the Pashtuns occupy. And if you look at the Pashtuns, there are many, many tribes of the Pashtuns. They are actually also constantly fighting with each other. But when it comes to a Pashtun collective issue, they get together, even though it may be for a short time. So you have seen these trends of Pashtun behavior as you kind of see their history. But I'll mention three historical events which have had a deep impact on the psyche of the Pashtuns. The first was 1747. That is when Ahmad Shah Abdali founded Afghanistan and gave a sense of kind of a nation to that region. The second is that immediately after the founding of the Afghan state, if you were to call it, right from 1948 onwards, the Pashtuns and the Afghans have been fighting the Sikhs. And they have seen the Sikhs take over, whether it was Peshawar, then Jamrud, and hence closing the Khyber Pass. So that's, I suppose, the only time in history where the Pashtun has felt contained and not getting access onto to a broader sea route. The third is the signing of the Durand Agreement in 1893, that was signed between the British government and the Amir of Afghanistan. The British, of course, signed it with the objective of creating a buffer state between the British Empire and the Soviet Empire. But for the Afghans, it was traumatic because it actually resulted in a division of their homeland. And frankly, the Pashtuns have never accepted the partition of their land and have raised, not accepted the Durand Line either, and have raised the Pashtunistan issue. If you were to look at the statement of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, he was a tall Pashtun leader. When he was speaking in the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, he said, and I quote, "We want to see all the Pathans on this side of the Durand Line joined and united together in Pashtunistan." Then you look at Afghanistan as a nation state. Afghanistan was the only country that voted not in favor of the admission of Pakistan as a UN member in 1947. And what did they say? The Afghan representative speaking in the UN General Assembly said, "Afghanistan cannot recognize Northwest Frontier as a part of Pakistan as long as the people of Northwest Frontier have not been given an opportunity free from any kind of influence to determine for themselves whether they want to be independent or to become a part of Pakistan." So clearly, Afghanistan as a nation state has not accepted the Durand Line as a boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that position continues till today. And the Pashtuns, they live both in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and they have influenced the politics of both the countries. In Afghanistan, there are about 15 million Pashtuns, where they are the biggest and the dominant ethnicity in Afghanistan. And the Pashtuns in Afghanistan have held power almost continuously, except for a brief period of time. And the question in Afghanistan always has been, and it remains so till today, how can you have stability in Afghanistan with the formation of a government that includes all other ethnic tribes as well, whether it's the Tajiks or the Uzbeks or the Hazaras? So this is as far as Afghanistan is concerned. As far as Pakistan is concerned, they are estimated to be about 31 million Pashtuns living there, a very important minority. But then you look at the flip side. It was only in 2010 that the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was established in Pakistan. And this is where the Pashtun identity was recognized. And even though the other groups, but the Punjabis, the Sindhis, and the Baluchis, they had provinces named after them right from the time Pakistan was created. So the Pashtuns had to fight for their identity in some sense. Coming to the Taliban, they are a more recent phenomena in the history of the Pashtuns. They are basically the children of the Afghan refugees who were living in camps in Pakistan after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. And they were the students who came out of madrasas. So that was the origin of the Taliban. The Taliban are, in one sense of the word, predominantly Pashtun, but I would say it is important to recognize that all Pashtuns do not subscribe to the worldview of the Taliban. So there is a bit of a difference there. And as far as Taliban were concerned, when they came onto the scene, which was sometimes in the mid-1990s, they were welcomed by many Afghans. They felt that this movement might bring certain security to them from a situation where the country was facing a civil war. And then, of course, there was 9/11 and things changed. But the current resurgence of Taliban, that is a very notable development, because along with that is the presence of the ISIS, and that is very worrying. So the big question today on Afghanistan is whether and how to prevent it from becoming a source of radicalization, terrorism, and insecurity, both regionally and globally. With these introductory remarks, I'm sure that many of these issues will come up for discussion. May I now request Mr. Tilak Devasher to introduce the book. I will wait in about 15 minutes, and then we take it from there. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh for organizing this discussion on my book. My thanks to Ambassador Vivek, Katju, to Dr. Shalini Chawla for agreeing to come and discuss the book. It's always a pleasure to be in the ICWA. This is my fourth book, as was just mentioned, where I talk about the Pashtun ethnic identity that straddles Afghanistan and Pakistan. And though no discussion about a people can be divorced from the countries in which they reside, yet this book is not about Afghanistan and it's not about Pakistan in the main. It's about the Pashtuns, it's about the people. This is their story. And what I'm doing in this book is to seek answers to questions like who are the Pashtuns, where did they come from, what are their social, cultural and religious beliefs. I then talk about the century of contact that the British had with the Pashtuns, the Durand Line, Ghaffar Khan and the politics of partition, the post-partition Pashtun politics in Pakistan, in Afghanistan developments that include the Saur Revolution, the Russian invasion, the Mujahideen, the Civil War, the rise to power of the Taliban in the 1990s, and then I talk about the US intervention in 2001, the Taliban insurgency for 20 years, the resurgence of the Taliban coming back into power after in 2021, the incubation of the ISKP, Islamic State Khorasan province, and the Al-Qaeda, and the dubious role that Pakistan has played in all these events. The one point that I also mentioned, and I'd like to mention here, is that from 2001, the United States and the Afghan government did have the possibility and the opportunity of mainstreaming Taliban, but they didn't for several factors that I explain in the book, as a result of which Afghanistan had to see 20 years of war. Let me also clarify the nomenclature. There is a lot of confusion at times between Pakhtun, Pashtun, Afghan, Pathan. And part of this ambiguity stems from the fact that the Persians used Afghan interchangeably with Pashtun by calling them Afghana or Afghan, and that has stuck. The British tried to make a distinction between Afghan and Pathan. Afghans were considered as close to the Persian Empire and they spoke Dari. The Pathans or the Pashtuns were closer to India and spoke Pashto. The tribes in the north called themselves Pakhtun and the tribes in the south called themselves Pashtun. Likewise, language, it is Pakhto in the north and Pashto in the south. In my book, I've used Pashtun and Pashto throughout in the book. A question I'm frequently asked is, why did I write this book? All authors are asked, why did you write this book? So the reason is that the Pashtuns matter, and they must matter vitally. An understanding of the key traits of the Pashtuns, their history and culture, Pashtunwali, and also the emergence of two key forces, Pashtun extremism and Pashtun nationalism, sorry, and the potential combination of the two are vital for peace and stability in this area. A superficial understanding of the Pashtuns and a superficial prescription has had devastating effects on this region. Therefore, to understand what Pashtun culture, where they are coming from, I think it's very important to have peace and stability in this region, without which there will continue to be a surge of refugees, drugs, and ungoverned spaces where international terrorism will incubate. Another question that I'm asked is, why have I written about the people and not the countries? The normal IR practice is to talk about countries. And the reason for this is that the Pashtuns who straddle an area of almost 100,000 square miles, and we just mentioned, occupied the land from the Indus to the Hindu Kush, had or lived together under a common political government from 1747 under Ahmad Shah Abdali, his successors, right up to 1834. In 1834, the Sikh Empire under Maharaja Ranjit Singh tore off a portion of it from the Indus to the Khyber. This was inherited by the British, who in turn passed it on to Pakistan. As a result, today, the Pashtuns are divided by the Durand Line between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and despite being perhaps the largest Muslim tribal population in the world, are without a country of their own. Now, despite this division and despite the fact that they have developed differently in Afghanistan and Pakistan, there's a lot of unifying factors amongst the Pashtuns. They have a common ideology of dissent a common religion, common ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and familial bonds, a common code, common historical memories. And all this makes it easy to see them as a single entity inhabiting a single piece of real estate, distinct from their neighbors. Moreover, this current division of the Pashtuns is only one of the avatars in which this land has seen over the centuries. The notion that the Pashtuns are one nation is best expressed by the Pashto phrase, Larobar yo Afghan, which means the Afghans in the low as the lowlands of Pakistan and high as the highlands of Afghanistan are one nation. A third question I'm asked about the title. Why a contested history? What is so contested about Pashtun history? And the reason is that this land and the people have been contested over centuries. Throughout history, this land has seen more invasions than any other in Asia and perhaps even the world. Right from the Greeks to the Persians, to the Sakas, to the Kushans, to the Huns, to the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, the Mughals, the British, the Soviets, the United States. This land has seen it all. Most of them tried to subdue and conquer the Pashtuns and ultimately failed, giving this land the moniker of the graveyard of empires. And the reason was that the Pashtuns, you cannot defeat a people who have no concept of defeat in the classical sense. They only knew survival, when to hide, when to run, when to talk, and when to fight, but as per Afghan time. These invasions have resulted in a very hardy and robust people with a unique way of life and a unique way of looking at the world. In medieval times, Pashtunistan was a borderland between the empires that ruled from India, Persia, and Central Asia. In the last 2 centuries, it has had the dubious distinction of being invaded by the great powers of their time. Great Britain in the 19th century, when they became pawns between Russia and Great Britain in the what was called the Great Game. In the 20th century, they were invaded by the Soviet Union when they became pawns between the United States and the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And in the 21st century, they were invaded by the United States, where they became the central actors in the war on terror. Therefore, this region has been contested throughout history. But who are the Pashtuns? There is no unanimity among scholars of who the Pashtuns are or where they came from. The various theories include a Semitic origin, that means they're one of the lost tribes of Israel, to an Indo-Aryan inception. While historians will continue to debate who the Pashtuns were, a lot of attempts have been made, or several attempts have been made, to codify Pashtun genealogies. And the most famous of them is the Makhzan-e-Afghani, History of the Afghans, compiled in India by Ne'matullah Haravi on being commissioned by Jahangir in 1613. According to these chronicles, the Pashtuns themselves claim descent from a single ancestor, Qais bin Rashid or Qais Abdul Rashid, who had gone to Medina in 622, was converted to Islam by the Prophet himself, came back and spread Islam. He had 4 sons, 3 biological and 1 adopted, who today are considered as the progenitors of the 350 tribes of the Pashtuns. Now, the interesting thing is that this narrative is an article of faith among the Pashtuns, who determine the start of their lineage with conversion to Islam, ignoring their whole history before Qais. They believe in the purity of the descent of their religion, believing that they have no infidel past, nor do they carry in their history the blemish of defeat or forcible conversion. Thus, the Hindu Shahi kingdom of Kabul, the Buddhist kingdom of Bamiyan, the Rashtrian influence in Ghazni, all of them are forgotten and are buried. Historically, this is not a very true account because Islam actually came to this area through the conquest of the Arab generals under the Rashidun dynasty and the Umayyad caliphs. But this is what they believe in. The Pashtuns have a unique and defining tribal code called Pashtunwali, the way of the Pashtun. This is an unwritten set of values, customs, and cultural codes that define ordinary life. And the various elements of Pashtun taken together represents the Pashtun's notion of a Gairatmand Pashtun, or a Pashtun who's leading an honorable life. At its core, Pashtunwali is about Nang, or honor, based on the triangle of Zan, Zar, Zameen, that is, women, gold, and land. I despise the man who does not guide his life by honor, wrote Kushal Khan Khattak, the 17th century Pashto warrior poet. The very word honor drives me mad. He also wrote, The very name Pashtun spells honor and glory. Lacking that honor, what is the Afghan story? The obligation to take revenge or badal is a critical part of Pashtun Wali. As the Pashtun proverb states, he is not a Pashtun who does not give a blow in return for a pinch. There is no time limit for revenge. Another famous Pashtun quote is that a Pashtun who took revenge after 100 years said, "I took it too quickly." Other critical parts of Pashtun Wali are Melmastia or hospitality and Nanvati or refuge. The concept of hospitality and refuge is held in such high esteem that at times it even trumps revenge, as seen in the chivalrous offering of food and provision even to enemies who seek shelter or refuge with the person. Taking an overview of the several strands about the Pashtuns that I talk about in the book, I'll just mention one or two. First, the tragedy of the Pashtuns is that since December 1979, they have been subjected to constant warfare. This prolonged war has caused one of the largest displacements of people in recent times, with the main victims being the Pashtuns, as also the Tajiks, Hazaras, and the Uzbeks. Whether they were refugees who sought shelter in Pakistan and Iran, or among the Pashtuns, internally displaced people in Pakistan as a result of various army operations. The Pashtuns have also suffered the most in the globalization of jihad because of the structural changes that Pashtun society underwent during this period. Traditional Pashtun leadership, the Maliks, were brushed aside at times violently and replaced with Afghan and Pakistani radical Islamists. Worse, those being killed were Pashtuns. Those who were killing were also Pashtuns. 6 of the 7 Mujahideen parties were Pashtun. The Taliban are Pashtun. The Tehreek-e-Taliban is Pashtun. Those whom they have killed in Afghanistan are Pashtun. Those whom they have killed in the erstwhile Fatah are also Pashtuns. Even children have not been spared, and the killings, the war continues even today. A second strand is the representation of their proclivity for constant conflict and warfare, largely due to excessive reliance on colonial literature. For example, and I quote Winston Churchill here, "Except at the time of sowing and harvesting, a continual state of feud and strife prevails throughout the land. Tribe wars with tribe. Every tribesman has a blood feud with his neighbor. Every man's hand is against the other, and all against a stranger," unquote. Unfortunately, there has been lack of counter-narrative about the Pashtuns that could challenge the colonial stereotypes. The non-violence of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the activities of the Pashtun tribal elders who have stood against the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda and paid a huge price for such resistance, and the evolution of the non-violent Pashtun Tahaffuz movement have not received the kind of attention they should have. Apart from the lack of counter-narratives, while there is an abundance of British literature on the Pashtuns, there is hardly any Pashtun version of how they saw themselves or how they saw the British. As Ghani Khan, Ghaffar Khan's son, put it, and I quote, "The Pathans have no written history, but they have thousands of ruins where the hungry stones tell their story to anyone who would care to listen." Finally, I'll wind up here. In my view, the key to peace in the Pashtun region would lie in a democratic and pluralistic Pakistan that can gradually change the prevalent mindset of the Punjabi-dominated Pakistani establishment. This mindset will have to evolve beyond seeing Pakistan's security purely in military terms and manipulate the religious sentiments of the deeply religious Pashtuns. This can only happen with a vibrant civilian democracy. The world community, and especially the United States, must recognize that in a fundamental sense, security in Afghanistan hinges on democratizing Pakistan. So long as the military dominates Pakistan and controls state institutions, there will be no democracy in Pakistan and no peace in Afghanistan. And secondly, Pashtuns will themselves have to find answers for their predicament and not depend on others to do so. So I'll stop now, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for introducing the book. Many, I'm sure questions will come up, but you made very important points. First of them being that the Pashtuns are the largest Muslim tribal society who don't have their own country. Second, you've of course described them as great warriors who have dug the graveyard of many empires. You have also spoken about the fact that the historical memory actually just starts from a particular point in history from 622 AD. And you have spoken about the Pashtun Wali, which has elements of revenge, refuge, and yes, conflict. So with that, may I request Ambassador Vivek Katju to make his remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Tilak, for this book. It bears the hallmark of your scholarship, as usual. It's so well researched, and you've tried to, and successfully, navigate a very complex subject with such ease and clarity. You've divided the book very well into 7 sections, and you've gone into depth in all these sections about the Pashtuns, and you're quite right. I think the first 2 sections deal with the Pashtuns and their different, their culture, their language, their religion, etc. And I think we all need to know more about the people who have made a contribution to the evolution of history in South Asia. We often forget that before the Mughals came, it was as you've noted yourself, the Pashtun tribes ruled large parts of North India for several centuries. And they've left their imprint here, Sher Shah Suri being there. And in the second section, you rightly said you focused on the British, and you've said very clear, you noted today that a great deal of knowledge that we have of the Pashtuns and the kind of understanding we all have developed of the Pashtuns is on the basis of British colonial literature. And I think that is where a problem lies. Because somehow or the other, because the way the Pashtuns themselves describe themselves, the way they project Pashtun-Wali, and the way the British projected them, have given a somewhat static account of the Pashtuns. They've ignored the evolution that has taken place among the Pashtuns over the last century, and especially since the fall of Nadir Shah, fall of the king Nadir Khan. The Pashtuns themselves have gone through enormous turbulence, starting with the introduction of Islamic theology from Arabia. We often forget the influence of say, the Ikhwan or the Al-Azhar on Afghanistan and the Pashtuns. In particular, Sayyaf was not a Taliban, but a Taliban. And the second was the influence of communism, which you've so well projected in your book. So I think today the time's come when we've got to look at Pashtuns with somewhat fresh eyes. Because the Pashtuns have fragmented. There is the Pashtun which inhabits the Pashtun heartland, but equally there are Pashtuns in northern Afghanistan who are the successors of those who were settled there, as you mentioned in your book, by Amir Abdul Rahman Khan. They are the Pashtuns in the diaspora. And therefore, I'm always a little confused about who represents the true Pashtun today, if there is such an identity as a true Pashtun. Second is how do the other ethnicities of Afghanistan look at the Pashtuns? how do the Hazaras perceive the Pashtuns? And that's a very different projection altogether. You talk to the Hazaras and centuries of persecution, wails through them. You talk to the Tajiks, you talk to the Uzbeks about the Pashtuns, because I have a very vivid recollection of talking to a Pakistani diplomat of Pashtun descent in Murray in 1997. And we were talking generally about Afghanistan, and he was a Pashtun, and he said, very matter of fact, he said, Ambassador, Mr. Katju, the land between the two rivers is ours. For him, it was as if the Durand line didn't exist. He says, between the Indus and the Amu Darya is ours. So here was a man who said that as of right, anyone who lives there, and they are a plural, they are the major ethnic group, they are not the majority. But it is their self-belief that they have the right to rule Afghanistan as it is composed today. So I think we've got to look at these factors too, because there is a well of sentiment against the Pashtun and what is perceived as Pashtun domination in Afghanistan, and that's a fact. Now, I think you've done a brilliant job of giving an account of how the Pashtuns in Pakistan evolved, and that we shouldn't look upon the Pashtuns as a violent people. Ghaffar Khan's movement is a remarkable movement in South Asian history. And you've done so well in describing the dynamic between the Islamism which is there today and Pashtun nationalism, and the contradictions between the two and the tensions between the two. And we really don't know, as far as I can see, we really don't know how the Pashtuns will navigate through this. And the last point I'll make, before thanking you again for this work, because it's a work which gives us enormous food for thought. And for India, for our strategic interests, this work is of great significance. The last point I'll make is that whatever the Afghans may say, I don't think the Durand is going to change. That's for two reasons. One is Pakistan. But the second, which is equally important, the non-Pashtun in Afghanistan doesn't want the Durand to change. Because he is convinced that if the Durand changes and you have the Pashtuns in Afghanistan incorporated into the Afghan state, for instance, then his position will be far worse than it is today. So I think that we've got to take this, howsoever dubious was the creation of the Durand, howsoever much of a sentiment that the Durand evokes among the Pashtuns, the same sentiment is not shared. I have not heard my friends who are Tajiks or Uzbeks or Hazaras ever want to challenge the Durand and its existence. I mean, that's a fact, as I've seen it. So I'll end there, thanking you once again for raising so many important issues and describing this, different facets of Pashtun life, culture, etc. in such detail and with so painstakingly and so with such remarkable clarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You brought a number of strands into the debate in terms of the fact that Tilak's book brings out perspective other than the British perspective on the Pashtuns, which was, I think, very much needed. So that is itself a great contribution to the Pashtun literature. And you've also spoken in terms of a certain fragmentation of the Pashtuns which has taken place, that they are no longer, they inhabit much more beyond the heartland into Afghanistan, and there is now an Pashtun diaspora also, and what kind of role they would play. And most importantly, sir, you've spoken about how the Pashtun Islam identity would match out or versus the Pashtun national identity, how that plays out. And of course, the long relationship between the Pashtuns and the other ethnic tribes in Afghanistan in particular, and also in Pakistan, because they have a complex relationship in Pakistan also, the Pashtuns, with the Punjabis and the Baluchis, and their whole large presence in the Karachi city. So that itself has implications. So with that, I give the floor to Dr. Shalini Chawla. The floor is yours.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll begin by thanking DG ICWA for inviting me here for this critical book discussion. The book is in the market and is being read with great interest. And in his exhaustive research, and I think it's just absolutely brilliant analysis, Mr. Tilak Devasher has provided the readers with unparalleled knowledge on this very unexplored subject that we have in this book. The book dissects the historical, ideological, cultural details of the Pashtuns on both sides of the Durand Line, and provides a very comprehensive portrayal of the Pashtun character. I found the book cover extremely fascinating when I first saw the book, because I think it really conveys the pride, determination, and agony of the Pashtuns, everything together in that one face, the Pashtuns, their suffering with the decades of war. The book structure is definitely very, very well thought out. It's very well conceived structure and covers an extremely large canvas, offering a deep understanding from the origin of the Pashtuns to multiple other dimensions. But what I found extremely fascinating, apart from what is obviously dealt in great detail, Pashtunwali and other aspects, was where he talks about the relationship of Pashtunwali with Islam. And he's also discussed influence of Sufism and Barelvi practices on Pashtuns. Because now what you see, a very, very radical aspect of the Pashtun ideology in TTP, who have massacred children also in the school. And then you have the PTM, Pashtun Tahafuz movement, who don't want to pick up any arms. In fact, the most moving pictures that you see of that movement, when hundreds of Pashtuns are holding pictures of their near and dear ones who have disappeared and missing. So you see this direct contrast in the same country, which is so small. So these different influences of, different aspects have been discussed beautifully in the book. And the historical details are substantiated with extensive quotes from experts and historians. And what I want to now just do in the next, say, 6-7 minutes, whatever I have, is that I feel that the book has brought out very interesting dynamics which explain the current geopolitical challenges. So the linking of those realities to now what is happening, and I think that's what makes the book a must-read for all of you sitting here and also others, anybody who wants to understand not only Pashtuns but also the regional security dynamics, so that you need to understand this aspect to be able to understand the phenomena which is going around in South Asia and how we need to now deal with it. And in this context, I would like to make 9 brief points. So one is the recognition of the Durand Line, which remains a very sour point between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we have seen how the relationship between Pakistan and Afghan Taliban have been strained on this issue, because none of the Afghan regime has ever recognized that the Durand Line, including the Rabbani government, and also on the fencing. So the book talks about the technical details of the Durand Line and explains you why this issue is there and how difficult it is actually to resolve. So many things which have been brought out in the book actually make you realize that how difficult it will be to now go back on that And then still, I think he has some optimism that they can maybe come together and resolve it. But obviously, as an author, you need to have that optimism. Otherwise, where will the world go? Second is Ghaffar Khan, who's also called as Frontier Gandhi. You would have read his quest for rights and autonomy of Pashtuns and the objectives of provincial autonomy of the Pashtun nationalists in Pakistan have been elaborated in detail. And this aspect actually very explicitly explains Pakistan's insecurity and apprehensions till date that we see, and its aspiration and continuously working on the strategy to have a pro-Pakistan government in Kabul. So why Pakistan has this concept of strategic depth is something that you can link from that part of history. And I would like to quote the author here, where he says that one of the critical goals of Pakistan's policies has been to curtail Afghanistan's support for Pashtunistan. So it's why Pakistan wanted Taliban there. Actually, this is one of the most critical factor. Then third, which the author also talked about, the fact of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in late 1970s, which not only altered the geopolitical dynamics, but led to the globalization of the conflict and idea of global jihad. And as he very rightly said, that this introduced structural changes in the Pashtun society and politics on both sides of the Durand line. Then fourth, emergence and evolution of the Taliban in Afghanistan has been explained very comprehensively, connecting multiple dots, which is the strategic objectives of Pakistan, the strategic objective of United States, and Pashtunwali. So I think these three critical factors he's talked about very well. And again, I would like to just quote him where he says, the dominant element in the insurgency, that's the Taliban insurgency, was Pashtun. Leaders chose to portray themselves as representative of Pashtuns fighting to take back their country from the occupying forces. And the section where he deals with the blowback of Pakistan's strategy of controlling Afghanistan through proxies also now tells you that how difficult it is to reverse the phenomena of extremism in Pakistan. So when we all say that can Pakistan go back as a normal state, or can it function as a secular, so-called relatively, but it's going to be very difficult. It would take generations to do that, and a complete mindset change. Then Taliban's position on women, which is the most debated issue by the international community today, and has been a deterrent in the international recognition of Taliban. The roots of Taliban's position on women also have found, I think, very adequate explanation in the book, and it's extremely interesting. The slogans which the PTM is raising, ye jo dehshat gardi hai, iske piche vardi hai, da sanga azadi da, about and PTM has been very, described very well in the book, where they are, protesting silently, as I said, for their rights in Pakistan. And also these slogans are representing their anger, the kind of, issues, alienation they have gone through in Pakistan, and in KPK and FATA, and also the state's response to PTM, I think, which needs international attention today, where there is media blackout in that part where they're not allowed to cover and the world is not aware of exactly. I mean, we still get to read, but still it's not getting the place and attention as much as it needs to get, and about how the military is handling this whole. But that goes very well in sync with Pakistan's whole strategic culture, where it is not used to taking opposition, and any opposition in the state is dealt with very brute military force. Then the TTP has been emboldened, as we see, after the Afghan Taliban takeover, after the US withdrawal. And here he actually, the author, I really like where he said that how the TTP has combined the harsh interpretation of Islamic doctrine, unprecedented violence and intimidation to drive the already weak government institution. Also, where his section on TTP he talks, you also get a very deep understanding of the linkage between the TTP and the Afghan Taliban. So when we could sit here and understand that this is, they are the same sides of the two sides of the same coin. How was Pakistani government even thinking that the Afghan Taliban would control, and how deep this connection is and why it cannot change? And this is obviously going to be extremely challenging, more challenging for the Pakistani state. We have seen already TTP has conducted more than 100 attacks in the last 2 months, and the security situation has really intensified in Pakistan. The Pashtuns are polarized today. We see a stark contrast in their position and how Pakistan has manipulated its strategy in Kabul to serve its strategic objectives, and it continues to play the dubious role. And finally, the book talks about the strengths and weaknesses of the Pashtuns. While Mr. Devasher has emphasized that it's the inability of the Pashtuns to unite in order to build their war-devastated country and establish peace. And he feels obviously that the onus lies of peace and stability with the Pashtun themselves, which is very right. Just because I am now a discussant of the book, sir, I have just one point where I feel that, where he talks about the fact that the international community needs to work towards a secure Pashtunistan. There maybe just leaves the reader craving for more, that how do we actually do that? And because there is an expansionist side of the Pashtun ideology in Taliban that we see, that even if they unite and come to one place, will that expansionist ideology stop there, or will they not crave for more? We have TTP. We also have the TTP in Central Asia. I'm hearing those aspects, but maybe that's for your next book. So thank you very much. But overall, it's a brilliant book and a must-read for all of you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shalini. That was a very, very in-depth, and you threw up a number of issues. So let me start with some of the issues which you have raised, and then I'll leave it to all three of you to see how you want to respond. You said that you looked at the Pashtun issue also from the point of view of Pakistan's objective of having a strategic depth. And that objective of strategic depth, the question is, has it been met? Or is this Taliban and TTP getting together and working together, defeating that objective? So point number one is that. And second is, what is the future of the global jihad started from really way back in the 1990s with the Soviet coming in and the Mujahideen group. So how are you looking at global jihad evolving in the region? Because that will have implications for the entire region. You even mentioned TTP, for example, in Central Asia. So now you're looking at a much broader canvas. So with these questions, may I first ask Tilak to respond, then Ambassador Katju, and then Shalini. And of course, free to respond to all the issues that were raised in the part of
I'll
the
just
discussion.
take 2 minutes on that. I think Vivek raised some very pertinent and critical aspects. One is the evolution of the Pashtuns. It's not a static view. Pashtuns have evolved over the last century, last 2 centuries even. And I think that is something which needs to be factored in. How they've developed in different countries, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the diaspora. You see, Pashtun labor working in the Gulf has been sending back money, which has actually disturbed the family system, because he's sending money to his wife and not to the head of the family. So a lot of these things which have not really been explored too well, how their social structures have, that's a very important point. And the other thing about the other ethnicities, right from the time when Amir Abdul Rahman shifted the Gilzai, 60,000 families into the north, precisely for this reason, that they had sort of ethnic cohorts on the other side, and Tajiks, Uzbeks, not so much the Hazara, the Tajiks and Uzbeks certainly. So he said, I must have Pashtuns on the borders to create this thing. So the other nationalities are not too well disposed towards the Pashtuns. Point very well taken. They don't want more Pashtuns coming. But I think Vivek will agree with me that no Afghan, whether Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, would ever talk about leaving or breaking up Afghanistan. They हमारे मसले हम खुद solve करेंगे, Despite that, there is that. On the Durand line, both Shalini and Vivek raised this. It's as far as Pakistan is concerned, it's a settled fact. Internationally also, most countries say it's your international boundary. Yet, when Pakistan's main objective with the Taliban was that they will recognize the Durand line. The Taliban didn't do it in the 1990s, they haven't done it now. In fact, now they have disputed it. They have dug up the fence, as we all know, and they've also said we don't accept this, the issue is unresolved, it divides brothers. So, Pakistan is certainly worried about the sanctity of the Durand line. They can fence it, they're a stronger country, but the fact that they keep asking the Taliban, or I've asked every government, recognize this line, means they have some fear about the Durand. And the reason for this is that the Loya Jirga of 1949, as far as the Afghans are concerned, after that there is no border with Pakistan. And since 47, Pakistan has not taken up this issue to formalize the border. And Shalini talked about the Sufis. It's very right. We don't think in today's context, at one time, Afghanistan, the present Afghanistan, was home of Sufism. For example, this Herat is called Khake-Auliya, the soil of Sufi saints. Ghazni is called the abode of Sufi saints. You had Ahmad Shah Abdali, who was a Naqshbandi himself, with a strong influence. This has something got, because of the after the Soviet invasion and the influence of Wahhabi Salafi influence, the Sufis' influence has got totally dissipated. Mullah Omar used to visit the grave of his teacher, Haji Baba, who was a Sufi scholar, every week. Can you imagine? Mullah Omar, the founder of the Taliban, used to visit the grave. And one of his big disputes with the Al-Qaeda was, the Al-Qaeda said, this is, polytheism. And he said, nothing of the ring, this is the way we are. And even, was wearing taweez, Zaif, Mullah Zaif, he'd say his father would prepare taweez for the people. So it's a very strong Sufi influence. I feel one of the way ahead. I mean, people have disputed this, and I've been told on Twitter because of this, that this Sufi influence and Sufi culture among the Pashtuns especially, somehow needs to be re-inculcated, along with a whole sort of other things, building the tribal structure, building the maliks and all that. Sufism, I think, can play an important role in this. Okay, so let me come to your points of, in one sentence, the strategic depth is working in reverse. The Taliban and the Pashtuns have got strategic depth in Pakistan rather than Pakistan getting strategic depth in Afghanistan. They realize it now. You see, Pakistan had 3 objectives for the Taliban in Kabul. One, as I mentioned, recognize the Durand line. Second, get India out of Kabul. And third, defang the TTP. A year and a half later, as Vivek very eloquently told the Pakistani delegation, ye sehra to aapke sir par hai, aap isko sambhalo. They have not defanged the TTP because of links which Shalini mentioned, the strong links that the Taliban and TTP have, and they will not defang them. They facilitated talks, and that's it. They have not recognized the Durand line. India is back in Kabul at the request of the Taliban. They say, please come and do the infrastructure project. So it is Pakistani, I think, and Shalini made a very valid point, that how did the Pakistanis even think that Taliban would do their bidding? I think it was a Punjabi hubris. कि हमने इनको 20 साल पाला ये आप बात मानेंगे हमारे. Not realizing what the Pashtuns or who the Pashtuns are and what is Pashtun Wali. Pashtuns, Taliban in opposition were one thing, Taliban in power, when all their families are back with them, are a totally different kettle of fish, which I think, I'm a Punjabi, beyond the conception of the Punjabi of what a Pashtun is. And the future of global jihad, I think it's a bold statement, but I think the velocity and the strength of it has dissipated since the Soviet invasion. Initially, when it came, you had a whole lot of Wahhabi Salafi influence. That is now petering out, especially when Saudi Arabia itself has stepped back from the kind of funding it was doing earlier. I think so. It's not that it's over. The Wahhabi Salafi influence still very strongly permeates this area. And, the influence of the Tablighi Jamaat is there. But I think the real velocity of it has come down, and maybe over the next decade or two, this influence will come down more, and the old Deobandi Sufi influence may retake. That, I think, will be the way forward.
Thank you, Tilak. Ambassador.
3 things. First, of course, there is no question of any ethnic group in Afghanistan challenging Afghan unity within its present territories. I was talking of incorporation of more Pashtuns who are now in Pakistan. Second, on the Durand, I entirely agree with you. No one agrees. And if you recollect, when the Pakistanis incorporated FATA through the constitutional changes, the Ghani made a statement against it, invoking the 1921 agreement. And he said that Pakistan should have first consulted Kabul before making changes in the constitutional changes, incorporating FATA into the settled, what he, during the British period, were the settled districts or into KPK. I mean, I don't think that comment of Ghani attracted a lot of attention, but he did. So that shows the kind of sentiment against the Durand. But having said that, the points I made as far as the other ethnic groups are concerned, I think my own experience of them interacting with them is valid. A third, I don't know, there is and this is a general point that I'll submit to you. Cultural differences matter. Cultural factors are important in the evolution of history. But somehow I've never been able to, and I'll confess, that still been able to determine, and perhaps Professor can guide us on this, determine their importance, because cultural, ethnic traits, cultural traits, etc., among all people, to my mind, are a factor of geography, of time and circumstance. And as these change, people change, culture changes. I mean, after all, we ourselves in India in the last 75 years have seen the most tremendous social and cultural changes in our own land. The kind of things we used to think were permanent about some of our own social groups, are they permanent? So, interpolating that with the Pashtuns, Pashtun Wali is a very important factor. And if you permit, I'll give you an example, and some of you might find this interesting. This is before you came to Kabul, Vijay. Sometime in July of 2002, the governor of Paktika invited me to Sharan, the capital. So I went there. He said he'd sent his escort, etc. The times were a little turbulent, and it was right in the shadow of the Pakistan board, the Durand, to put it more accurately. And in the afternoon, he'd organized tent pegging. So there were about 600 to 800 Pashtuns divided with a galloping track in between, and riders were coming and doing tent pegging. And 600 of them were armed with Kalashnikovs. And the two chaps who were with me, two policemen who were guards in the embassy, they whispered, they said, "Sahab, yahan sabke paas asle hai, yahan pe khatra hai." So I told them, "You are the safest here. There is Pashtun Wali." So he said, "Wo kya cheez hai sahab?" I said, "Inka culture hai. Tum ghabrao nahi, koi nahi kuch karega. You are the safest here." They were very skeptical. So there is Pashtun Wali, certainly. I mean, I felt very safe there. But my only point I'm making is that I don't know how this evolves. On that I have this. And on global jihad, I agree with Tilak. I think there are big question marks. We read about the evolution of the ISIS and its Afghan chapter, IS, Khorasan, ISKP. But I don't know whether anyone really has a fix on this as yet. At least I don't have a fix. I don't have any access to it, naturally. Official information, my sources are limited to the media. So, and the little conversations I have, the few and conversations I have with Afghan friends, hasn't been able to give me a little fix on how it's all evolving. Certainly it's evolving. They're claiming uh, acts of great violence. But on the same time, the Americans seem to be keeping a hawk eye on this, and they have the technology to knock off people very effectively, as we saw with Zawahiri.
Thank you so much, sir. Shalini, will you like to pick up from here?
Just I'll start with very briefly on global jihad, because what I feel, I agree with Mr. Devasher and Ambassador Katju that the concept seems to be diminishing, because what I see right now is more like a regional jihad, what I call it, with TTP and Taliban and Islamic State there. Islamic State, sir, is absolutely right. We have seen it, like we don't know exactly what to take, but when as the whole Taliban was coming into power, you had Russia, China, Pakistan, everybody engaging with Taliban. One common thread with all these regional actors and the fears that they had is that they did not want ISIS in their own territory, and they wanted Taliban to take care of that. That was one of the common concerns with the Russians, with the Chinese, Central Asia, everybody. So many times as an analyst, I felt that maybe Taliban deliberately did not want to destroy them, because that was their currency to kind of get engaged to all these powers. I mean, that's one aspect of it. That's what I felt. And Taliban, I think coming there, the whole concept of jihad, the emboldenment is there, that it's a victory of an ideology. And that's why I don't see the phenomena settling down so easily, until unless Pakistan military comes back and comes up with harsh military operations like they did, but then it did not settle down even at that time. Coming to the strategic depth concept, the origin was in Bhutto's time, when he made a statement which became quite well discussed and talked about, when he said Pakistan is not only a South Asian state, it's a West Asian state. He said that. And then we saw after 1971 the fear of not further disintegration, and that's where we had this whole concept of strategic depth, coming and evolving, and Pakistan's deep desire to now have a pro-Pakistan government in Kabul. And four factors were always critical. They still remain critical for Pakistan. One was definitely the Durand Line issue, which they wanted the Afghan regime to accept. Second was to control the Pashtun nationalism in their favor on their part of territory. Third was deny India any space in the Afghan territory. And fourth, use the Afghan soil to train the anti-India groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. So those were the four aspects to that. Now, do we see those fulfilling? There are problems there, but I mean, the Taliban has not accepted the border. Pashtun nationalism, we see TTP is holding its head high, and we have those issues. But at the end of the day, if you really think, I mean, Taliban in Afghanistan still remain very dependent on Pakistan. That is my analysis, that whatever you say, this whole, we can feel very happy about it, that they have like strained relationship, but I still feel that the dependence factor between Afghan, Taliban and Pakistan will still continue pretty high for some time to come.
Thank you, Shalini. I won't even attempt to summarize what's been said, but Tilak, would you like to make a few more comments? Then we open the floor. Open the floor? Okay. Yeah. Professor Mani.
I have two puzzles. One is radicalization of Pashtuns, which actually is post-Soviet intervention. There were three factors working probably. One is the attraction for religion, the true radicalization. Second, money which was flowing into them. And third, the international support in developing their vested interest to get back to power. Now, what is it? Wonder if you will throw some more light on what actually made their otherwise secular identity, their own identity for independence, succumb to this religious global jihad or whatever you call it. why they got radicalized. I mean, what advantages, and then, culture throughout the history of human evolution uh, uh, ends up as a tool for political manipulation and power seeking. Everywhere, anywhere. I mean, whether Cold War or before Cold War or whatever else it is. The culture is to that extent, but it remains, it lasts. I mean, look, uh, look at your India, the way things are being revived because of whatever else it is. The second puzzle is, this Durand line. The British, I have read their other agreements in the subcontinent, particularly three big lines, the Redcliffe and the McMahon and the Durand. They drew these lines largely to consolidate and advantage the empire. They didn't care about the consequences of these lines at all. Therefore, it was for them and that's why they were not serious about the lines. The way they drew the lines very, very non-seriously. They were just using and making compromises. They will draw a line and put it back wherever it thought. So their whole emphasis was on the empire consolidation, how or trade or whatever else. Now, if they had not drawn the Durand line, what stakes the Pashtuns had in which part of territory in terms of today? For imagine hypothetically that there is no Durand line, how would they settle with the Pakistanis?
I'll take 1-2 more questions and then to you, Tilak. There's a question there.
Sir, I'm Shripati. I'm a fellow with the council. Shripati, fellow with the council. I got 2 questions. You briefly touched upon the other ethnic groups in Afghanistan and the Pashtuns. What about the same in Pakistan? Especially with, say, in Balochistan, where northern Balochistan is completely Pashtun land, and the Baloch have got double whammy, one with the Punjabis, now with the Pashtun. And also the attitude of the Punjabis or the Sindhis and the Mohajers in Karachi. So that dynamics. Second is that given the fact that in contemporary history of the past century or so, the Pashtuns have been divided on tribal, geographical, and political processes. Even today, you have got the 2 Talibans fighting with 2 different ideology, and then you have got a political movement which is relatively peaceful. And in the absence of singular identity, can they reconcile all their differences within themselves and live in harmony, minus the other groups, at least among themselves?
One more question. You have the floor.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm Lakshmi, Research Fellow at the Council. And so there is an observation that the religious minorities of Afghanistan, that is Afghan Sikhs and Hindus, had settled in mostly those parts of Afghanistan that were dominated by Pashtuns. So I would like to ask you if there is any particular reason for that. Thank you.
Tilak.
On the point that Professor Muni had talked about radicalization of the Pashtuns, I think one common factor in all the 3 you mentioned, religion, religion, money, and international support, Zia is a common factor, Zia-ul-Haq. And Zia found that the Soviet invasion gave him this brilliant opportunity to ingratiate himself back with the West after he had hanged Bhutto. He was a pariah. But this gave him this
opportunity. Get money.
So all the three. Yes. So, and the way to do it was to exploit the religious sentiments of the deeply religious Pashtuns. You see, Pashtuns have always, in the past, whenever against the British, it used to be a Maulvi or a Mullah, whether it was, the British called them mad mullahs. They would always be able to excite the people on the basis of religion, on the basis of jihad, and get them to lead an expedition against the British. Zia knew this, so he exploited the religious sentiments for money and to get international support so that his regime gets consolidated. So that is the reason. For example, I'll give you a couple of examples. And it suited the US. The curriculum of the madrasas to recruit people for the Soviet jihad was prepared in the University of Nebraska. And they had textbooks which showed 1 Kalashnikov plus 1 Kalashnikov equal to 2 Kalashnikovs. If there are 3 Russians, and 1 is killed, how many Afghans would be, Russians would be left? This was taught to, and I've seen these books myself. So this was again exploiting the people so that they would get foot soldiers to fight against the Soviet. So radicalization came through the madrasas for recruits used by Zia because he saw, and Zia didn't just believe in defeating the Soviets. He had a much larger conception of the end state of the Afghan jihad. He wanted to install Gulbuddin Hekmatyar in Kabul, the most radical of all the Mujahideen, and to have a confederation of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So this whole revanchist idea of the Durand Line and Pashtunistan would be done once and for all. He couldn't succeed. His successors couldn't succeed because Hekmatyar couldn't take Kabul, and it was the Tajiks, Rabbani and Masood who took it. Therefore, they went to the Taliban. So this radicalization actually started by Pakistan for the sake of its own small tactical objectives. But the results are there for see. The blowback is now being faced by Pakistan. The second point you mentioned was on the Durand Line. You see, I think there's a basic difference between the Durand Line and the Radcliffe Line. Radcliffe spent months studying. He had complete charts, population mix, through which Punjab was demarcated.
No,
in the case of Durand,
he confesses that I did it very hastily.
No. And let me also tell you, he was working on the breakout plan made by Wavell. Lord Wavell would actually make out this plan. So Radcliffe had done much more homework. Durand just went in an A4 map size. The line was drawn. And there also the Amir did not know English. And though it was agreed that the Dari thing would be signed, Durand made him sign on the English thing. So the Durand Line and the British, you see, on the same day, on the same time, 2 treaties were signed. One was demarcating the Russia-Afghanistan border, and the second was the British India, and that was set in perpetuity. Or, time period was given for the Russian. Here, because it was spheres of influence, no time period was mentioned. And that is the reason why, even today, and after the 1921, as you mentioned, is the last treaty, you had mentioned 21, is the last treaty between British India and Afghanistan. Post 49, when the Loya Jirga was held, and the Afghan government said, we don't agree to the Durand Line, we don't agree to the Treaty of Gandamak, by which Northern Balochistan and these places came to. So there is no boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan as far as the Afghans are concerned. The other, you mentioned about other ethnic groups. You see, the Baloch have no problem with Quetta and north of Quetta being a Pashtun area. They are not, because there has never been a Pashtun, a Baloch city. I mentioned my book on Balochistan. If you read that, they have no problem. There is no problem between the Pashtun and Baloch because वो कहते हैं दोनों अपने ज़मीन पर बैठे हैं. It's not that the Pashtuns are encroaching on Baloch land. It's not that Baloch are encroaching on Pashtun land. And Quetta has always been a Pashtun city. So there is no problem amongst them as such. Yes, Pashtuns have been divided along tribal lines. The Gilzai Durrani rivalry, the Masood Wazir rivalry is, famous. They are divided on tribal lines. And you mentioned about differences. Yes, certainly. That is part of the tribal society in Afghanistan, has been there. Whether they now can bridge these differences and come up with a larger vision, that is, again I mentioned in my book, Ahmad Shah Abdali was able to do it. Amir Abdul Rahman was able to do it through force of character, through the force of their will. They bended the tribes to their will and were very successful. What the Pashtuns lack today is a leader who has stature, who has character, who can make them all come together, maybe temporary in time and space, but at least right now they don't have that. There's total fragmentation. I agree with that fragmentation. And you mentioned, anything else that you mentioned? So that was and one other point about radicalization, if I may. There are 2 institutions among the Pashtuns. One is called the Hujra and the other is the Masjid. Masjid is, of course, we all know what Hujra is. Every house has a Hujra, where in the evening people sit down like a veranda, charpais, they smoke a hookah, they discuss the day's affairs. Village has their own Hujra. in traditional Pashtun society, the hujra has always dominated the masjid. And if the Maulvi was stepping out of line or trying to be, smart in some way, they would get rid of the Maulvi. And the Maulvi was always poor and he depended on the hujra for his livelihood. As a result of the Soviet invasion and vast amounts of money coming in, is the masjid has become independent of the hujra and started dominating the hujra. And that he finds that because recruits were required, because madrasas became important, therefore the masjid has gained so much more importance, which was never there in Pashtun society. And that's the reason why radicalization and the Pashtun structures have broken down so vehemently, both sides of the Durand line.
I'll just make one addition. I think changes in Afghan Islam began in the 60s. When people like Sayyaf or Burhanuddin Rabbani came back from the institutions like the Al-Azhar, influenced by changes by, say, the Ikhwan or by Wahhabism, etc. So that, and they were all teachers in Kabul University. And they influenced people like Gulbuddin or Ahmad Shah Massoud, etc. So when Dawood came to power, after ousting his cousin the king, Nadir Shah, Zahir Shah, forgive me, Zahir Shah, Bhutto used these people. He brought them to Afghanistan, to Pakistan and trained them. The ISI trained them. And then was it in 74 or 75 that he sent them across, 74 I think, he sent them across for an uprising which failed, which you mentioned in your book.
Yes.
It failed and a whole lot of people were massacred and it was only Ahmad Shah and some people who really got saved, Gulbuddin got saved. It was, of course, the radicalization what took place in the 80s, as Tilak so well put it, was a different order altogether. But the germs were put in there. There were two parallel movements. One was a communist movement taking place, and the other was this Islamist movement.
Shalini, would you like to add something? We'll take another round and then we'll close because we are running out of time.
I'm Shubhana Barua, fellow at the council. Since Shalini ma'am talked about current geopolitics, and given the recent Peshawar attacks and coming back of the TTP, do you expect a Zarbe-Az 2 kind of a response in the current context?
Okay. So, sorry, you want to take some more questions? You see, it's very interesting that despite the Peshawar mosque attack and the attacks before that, the army's reaction has been extremely muted. They did something in Swat, but in KPK and in Balochistan and Quetta, the army's reaction has been very muted. And people are wondering that is it because it's a new army chief, he doesn't have control over his troops, or are they waiting for something before? Because this kind of insecurity that is developing in KPK, it's not only that, it's extortions, it's all kinds of things that are happening, and the army has not been able to. Or, I mean, if you look at the conspiracy theory, then it is the army seeking a more direct role before they will act, because they know what happened last time. The only way the only sort of template they have is to denude the population in Waziristan. Last time, about 2 million refugees became IDPs from Waziristan, North and South Waziristan, in camps, went to Lahore, went to Karachi. Then you had this Naqibullah Masood's incident for the visit to the PTM. Either they're waiting to denude these whole areas, whole scale, and then go after the TTP. Or he doesn't have the confidence to move in now. So Zarbe-Az 2 may take place, it has to, something has to be done. Otherwise, the TTP is gaining more and more strength, becoming more and more bold. So, yeah.
It's like very small point here, because I think she raised a very important point, because what is happening also with TTP is that it's portraying itself like a nationalist movement. They are running their own government, they have announced their own cabinet. So, and if you see what they are doing is exactly what Taliban did it in Afghanistan. So they are just following the same pattern. And while I agree fully what Mr. Devasher said about why, because right now Pakistan is in a very bad state, not only economically, but politically, what is happening there in this. So all these three factors, it's difficult right now to go ahead with a military operation which can cause multiple other issues. And also I think there are very different factions in Afghan Taliban where they have the stress going on. So the repercussion and the fallout there is also something I think they're not sure how they will manage. So we see the, I think, operation sometime or the other for sure, because that's the only way Pakistan military and the regime knows to deal with the opposition. So we will see it, but not that soon. I guess it's going to be some time before we see that.
I'll just have one sentence. I think a game of chicken is being played. Shalini mentioned that the Taliban are dependent on Pakistan. That's true. Their families there, their properties there, etc. But they need something to counter. And what is their counter? It's their hold on the TTP and the nexus with the TTP. So TTP is a card with the Taliban. And if the Pakistan army were to launch an operation, what does the TTP want? They want a reversal of the decision on FATA. And that will be that's not a popular decision as far as FATA is concerned. So the Pakistan army is in a quandary. They really are in difficulty as far as this is concerned.
Point forward, if I may. Just as you very rightly said, the TTP is the sword or the knife that the Taliban have on Pakistan's neck. There is a suspicion that Pakistan is using the ISKP as a sword against the Taliban. So it's a fascinating dynamic. You know, that Noora Kushti, and this is more than Noora Kushti, you know, this is actually violence, people are dying. And they feel that, you know, it could well be that the ISKP is a knife that Pakistan is developing, that if the Taliban don't behave.
So it's a game being played in many, many ways, so many, many dynamics in the region. It's a great game again, as rightly Tilak says. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and we'll continue our discussions over tea. And Anvesha, you want to say something?
Okay. Ma'am, just on behalf of ICWA, I would like to take this opportunity to once again thank the author and the distinguished panelists for graciously accepting our request and taking part in the book discussion. We have benefited immensely from your insightful remarks. I thank the audience for their valuable participation in the event and enriching it with their questions. With this, may I now invite everyone for high tea in the foyer. The copies of the book are also available there for purchase. Thank you all. Have a good evening.